Good evening all and welcome. Before we jump into the world of cabins, I need to offer a trigger warning for some of these stories. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Did you ever have a secret base or hideout as a kid? I think a lot of us kids used to build bases. I found mine in the mountains. It was an abandoned cabin. This experience took place when I was in my 4th year of elementary school. I used to hang out with 2 kids from class, and it was when I was with them that I discovered the cabin. We would always go out and play in the mountains. When we opened the door, we saw cobwebs everywhere. It felt as if we had just entered a dungeon or something out of a video game. We quickly realized that in the past, someone must have lived there, because there was furniture still there. However, most of it was busted up and unusable, but we were thrilled with our new discovery. It felt like it was ours, our new secret base. From that day onwards, we spent most of our time after school at our secret base. I took an old chair from my place up there, and we would bring comics and snacks. It was awesome. We wanted to keep the secret base to ourselves. We decided that no one else from our school or outside of the school was allowed in, so we pulled our money together and brought a padlock and a latch. We installed it on the outside of the door and locked it whenever we left. We also installed a single bolt lock on the inside so we could keep people out while we were in there. Each day at class we would decide who would be the first person to get there, and that person would become the key holder for the day. Whoever came to the hut after that would have to use a secret signal, a specific kind of knock to gain entrance. This knock was pretty simple, and I still remember it. It goes like this: 2 knocks, a pause, 1 knock, a pause, and then finally 3 knocks. So one day one of the 2 friends and I were heading to the secret base while we waited for our 3rd friend to come along. That day he was held up by some after-school activity. After a while, my friend and I in the cabin heard a knock at the door. We both thought that it was our friend, and I raced over to the door to unlock it and let him in, but my other friend grabbed my arm and whispered, "That's not the secret knock." A voice on the other end of the door, which kind of sounded like our friend, then said, "Hey guys, it's me. Open the door." This was followed by 3 short knocks. It was really weird because it was our friend who was running late's idea to create the secret knock, and now he wasn't using it. I said to my other friend that it must be our friend out there, and that he'd just forgotten the knock. But then he reminded me that we had promised never to open the door until we heard it. We were bound by our oath to keep the door shut, and we took it very seriously. Another quick 3 knocks came to the cabin door, and we stood there in silent defiance. More knocking followed. It wasn't the secret knock, so the door remained locked. The voice from behind the door, which sounded to me like my friend, began to get angry. "Open it," it ordered in a stern voice, and we stayed silent. "Why won't you open for me?" I don't know how many times I almost went over there and opened it. I was really wrestling with the idea in my head, but something deep down was always persuading me to keep my distance until I heard the correct secret knock, but this time something felt wrong. There was now a hammering at the door. The voice now sounded less and less like my friend when it shouted in a booming voice for us to open. It sounded nothing like him. We looked at one another in the dusty old cabin with eyes that pleaded for this to be over. Suddenly the knocking stopped and there was nothing out there but silence. My anxiety faded. I waited a few moments and then unlocked the door and looked out. There was no one there. We left our secret base and headed to our friend's house. When we got there, we saw his mum in the garden and asked him where he was. She said that he was ill. She had to rush to school because he was running a high fever, and by the time that she had got there, he was already in the ambulance heading for the hospital. That made us feel really weird. On one hand, of course, we were worried about our friend, but on the other we realized it couldn't possibly have been him at the cabin door. After we left his house, we spoke about what happened in the cabin, and we both considered ourselves lucky that we didn't open the door. My friend suggested that we probably shouldn't go back there again, and I reluctantly agreed. We went our separate ways and headed home. When I got home, the sun was still up and shining. My mum hadn't come home from work yet, and I dropped my school bag in the lounge and grabbed a drink from the fridge. I was feeling pretty tired, and laid on the sofa for a while and shut my eyes. I must have had my eyes closed for no more than 10 seconds when I heard a noise. A knock at the door. Our home had an intercom system, a bit like the Ring doorbells that are popular these days. If someone pressed the doorbell, you could see who it was on a little monitor inside the house. So I was wondering why someone hadn't pressed the bell, but I know that some people don't always press it. I got up and headed for the door, and then I stopped in my tracks. Something dawned on me. I recognized the knock. It went like this: 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock, pause, and 3 final knocks. That was our secret knock. My head was spinning. Then they did the same knock again. This was no coincidence. I could see through the frosted glass who or whatever was out there was bigger than my friends. There was a dark, hulking shadow looming in front of the door. I felt like whatever was trying to get into our secret base had followed me home. The banging at the door got louder and louder. I didn't know what to do, so I called my friend, the one who was with me in the cabin, and after a few rings he answered the phone. "Hey, you won't believe this," I told him, and explained the exact rhythm of the secret knock was being knocked on my door. I was in shocked silence. Then another voice spoke through the phone, and it said 3 chilling words. "Open the door." That's all I remember. I woke up lying on the sofa. I wondered if it was just a dream, but then I saw the phone lying on the floor. It was a corded phone, and I went over to pick it up, and there was no dial tone, only silence. I quickly put it back on the cradle and backed away from it. The next day at school, my friend said that he had heard some knocking at the door, which sounded like our secret knock. I wonder if something from the mountains followed us. Maybe something happened in the cabin, and whatever it is still resides there. I heard stories of afflicted family members being sent away to live in the mountains to prevent spread of disease in towns. Who knows if this could have been the remains of one of those. My friend, a 25-year-old female from college, shared a harrowing story with me that happened to her and her high school friends. She's from Buffalo, New York, and often went on camping trips to local upstate campgrounds. When she was a senior, she and 4 of her friends went to a campsite fitted with rows of cabins on the water that people could rent. As the sun went down, the girls noticed that their neighbors, a few cabins down, a group of guys similar in age, were playing music and grooving around the campfire, drinking beers. One of the guys asked them if they wanted to join. When they got over there and started hanging with the guys, everything seemed completely normal, and they were having a fun time. As night progressed, one of the guys there started to get blackout drunk and eventually pulled out a revolver and said that it belonged to his dad. He started waving it around and playing with it, which obviously freaked everyone out, his own friends included. Eventually, he began pointing it to his head and laughing, while his friends were yelling at him to put it away and how that wouldn't be funny. The girls at this point were fairly disturbed and told the guys that they should get back to their cabin and said their goodbyes. When they got back to their cabin, they all spoke about how freaky that was and expressed concern for the drunken guy. Then they all moved on to other topics of conversation and forgot about it for the time being. A few hours later, sometime in the middle of the night, they heard a loud bang coming from the direction of their neighbor's cabin. Shortly after this, a brigade of cop cars showed up to the scene. One officer came to my friend's cabin and started asking them questions about the cabin they visited earlier that night. When my friend asked the officer what happened, he explained that the kid had shot himself in the head in front of his friends. They weren't able to discern if he took his own life or it was accidental. My friend, to this day, still has PTSD over this incident and explained that she rarely goes camping anymore because of it. My friend was at camp with me, and we were in the same cabin. We all stayed up until we got tired and went to sleep. My friend Charlie and I stole some instant coffee packs from the kitchen and had them in the water at night. Charlie didn't have a good caffeine tolerance like me, so he ended up staying up a bit longer after we all fell asleep. I asked him what he was going to do, and he said he brought a novel and he was going to read it until he fell asleep. It was around 1 a.m. and we were all sleeping peacefully, and then we heard the biggest scream. Charlie was crying and shaking in his sleeping bag, and everyone in our cabin came over to see what was wrong and help him out. He screamed really loud, and if that didn't wake up other cabins and the teachers, then his loud crying after did. Soon after all the teachers were inside the cabin, I had to stay on my bunk bed to not be squashed. Charlie told us he saw a ghost wandering around the cabin. He also said he heard the wind breeze while the ghost was moving. Another guy in my cabin backed him up saying he heard it too. Charlie was sent home and everyone carried on in camp. However, it felt really weird. I talked to him a lot when we all got home, and he gave me even more details. He told me he looked at the ghost for about 3 seconds because he was too shocked to say anything. The ghost wasn't white like in the movies. It was transparent, barely visible, and perhaps the biggest detail was that it looked like a little boy. Not in our school uniform, but in really old-fashioned clothes. Charlie told me he wasn't too scared of the boy in those 3 seconds, but shocked because it was a ghost. Then what really threw him off was after those 3 seconds when he screamed, the ghost boy looked at him with shallow, lifeless eyes and rushed out the cabin. This was the wind sound he heard, as well as the other guy. I then remember distinctly what Charlie said, because if I were him, I would doubt everything. He said the ghost looked like me, with no expression, even though it was just for a split second, and it felt like an eternity. I knew it just wasn't my mind playing tricks on him when I saw him, he said. There was no soul in them, like it had been sucked away. It really terrified me, and I felt really bad for him. I find it really weird because Charlie is the most honest guy I know, and he seems really traumatized. I was considering if it was the effects of the coffee, but he'd had it in the night before and didn't see any hallucinations. Plus he was a regular drinker and loved the taste, even though it made him stay up. And to this day, that story still gives me the chills. So, this last weekend, my wife and our 3 young sons went up to the family cabin. From day one, there have been unusual things about this place, but today was even spookier. Everyone went to bed at around 10:30, and I went to the kitchen to sneak a bite of the pan cookies my wife made earlier. As I was cutting a piece, I heard a female voice whisper, "What are you doing in here?" It immediately unnerved me and I said, "Mary?" without turning around. I looked, fearing I'd been caught, but she wasn't there. So I continued cutting the cookie. I then heard an even louder, clearer female whisper, "Hey, are you going to eat that? I want one." I looked around and there was no one there. I quickly hustled to my bedroom and jumped into bed. My wife was still awake and obviously hadn't been to the kitchen asking for cookies. I made myself go back to the kitchen about 10 minutes later to clean up the mess, and didn't hear anything. The next night I heard nothing until I got to bed. I was on my side and felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned my head to look and I heard a voice whisper, "Mum? Dad?" I quickly walked across the hall and my boys were fast asleep. I also heard more words that I couldn't make out though. I wonder what exactly is residing in the cabin with us. My mother and 2 older brothers would visit my auntie and 3 cousins around Christmas. The whole family would get together too, uncles, aunties, you name it. They lived up near Inverness in Scotland, a place called the Black Isles. It's actually a place called Cromarty, but Inverness is more well known, so let's just say that. The Black Isles was said to be used back in the day as a place where witches would meet up on Halloween and perform dark rituals, animal sacrifices, that sort of thing. Whether this be true or not is another story. But this is the real story. We all rented out holiday homes just down the road from my cousins' homes. It had multiple bedrooms, so it was perfect for many guests. Me and one of my older brothers and his friends from Africa were all staying in one room. They were fast asleep. I, however, was not. I woke up suddenly and I didn't know why. I scanned the room with my bleary eyes. It was very dark. I couldn't hear anything but the snores from my brother and his friend. The door to the room slowly opened with a creak, and I swear to God I froze with fear. I didn't see anything enter through it, but as I tried to scan my eyes around the room, I started to see shadow figures pulsating and hovering around the two adjacent beds, hovering and pulsating over my brother and his friends. There must have been at least 3 of them. The third one stood over my bed, although this apparition didn't have any human-like features except for maybe the shape of something human. I could feel like something was staring right at me. I decided then the only course of action was to turn over and face the wall and go to sleep. The morning after, I shared my experiences to a few of my family members, and they joked it might be the witches that performed those rituals in the past, and generally didn't believe me. Except one person, my brother's girlfriend. She told me she experienced something as well. She was only sleeping next door and told me she felt like someone sat down on her end of the bed in the night, and said she could feel the weight of someone on her legs, but nothing was there. Very frightened by this, I decided to read the guest book to see if anyone else had reported anything else weird and unusual, but nothing of the sort was there. I'll never forget what I saw that night, and if you're ever near the Black Isles, or stay in the same holiday home I did, coincidentally it's called the Burn Farm Mackenzie Cottage in Avoch, Scotland Highlands, be aware of any figures entering your room at night. I used to live in a log cabin just down the street from the Antietam battlefield. Most nights while everyone was asleep, I could hear a woman humming. I was the only woman in the house. Also, I slept on the couch at the time, and many times I felt like someone was running full force into the couch. Well, one day I heard people outside my front window and looked to see who it was. It was the local tour group, stopping and sitting on the porch in front of my house, discussing the house. Now, this wasn't ever the first time they'd done this. They'd done it many times before. But this time I listened in to say what they had to say, and it was pretty scary. That then confirmed my suspicion that there was something spooky going on in this house. For my brother's bachelor party/camping trip, a group of his friends got a cabin in Yosemite to stay in for 3 days. During my first night there, I noticed something odd. In the room where my brother and I were staying, as soon as we got into bed, which was pretty late and well after sundown, the ceiling began creaking really hard. It sounded as if there was someone walking on it. I dismissed this as thermal contraction from the cold, or perhaps some small animals walking on the roof, and went to sleep. But by the 3rd night, it had become clear to me that this was not something with mundane explanations. That night I went to bed early, while the guys were still up playing games and drinking, and the creaking noises started up as if on cue. I ignored them as I usually did, but then one of the decorative bronze tiles on the wall started tapping and grinding on it. I had no rational explanation for this. It couldn't be thermal expansion, and no other way to explain it at all, but I was tired, so I turned in bed and really tried hard to ignore it. It was at that moment I felt something grab my forearm. I quietly said, Nope. Not wanting to deal with some restless ghost, and within a few seconds I could hear the ceiling of the room down the hall creaking. When I was between 9 and 10, I used to attend a camp in Muskoka, Ontario, that for 1 week you would stay with a group of kids and do activities, and then 1 week do a canoe trip. I slept on the top bunk in the corner of a cabin with about 5 bunks, all filled. The counselor had a bed behind a curtain off to the side. One night/early morning, I woke up to a noise. I look over the bunk, and standing hunched over in the middle of the cabin was a figure outlined by moonlight. It was maybe 5 feet tall and had a pointed face, fingers and feet. Looked like a goblin. It was slowly walking around and sniffing over each kid on the lower bunks, and I was frozen. I don't think it knew there were kids on the top bunks. After a while, it opened the door, walked down the steps, and knocked the fire barrel over. Then I heard the counselor call out and watch out for the barrel. Ironically, and late. That's partly when I realized the counselor was still in bed. To this day, as I'm now in my late 30s, I feel like the thing was looking for a kid to be awake. What it wanted, I don't know. There have always been stories of children being taken or replaced, but I don't know. Suffice to say, I never went back. When I was 13, we visited my grandparents who lived in a cabin in the woods near a small lake. It was a beautiful view in the mornings, and I took a friend with me to come because there wasn't any Wi-Fi or anything, just an old small TV from the 90s. It only had a few channels and a VCR player. They had a lot of horror VCR tapes because my grandmother loved horror, and I also love it now. But back to the story. It was a 3-hour drive to the nearest town and 6 hours from where we lived. The road trip was amazing, and we got there at about 8 p.m. at night. My friend and I were so happy to be there, and we opened the doors of the car and I went to hug my grandparents, and they showed us where we would be sleeping, in the upstairs room, with one big bed and a bathroom and balcony overlooking the lake. It was winter and snowing at night, but I always get so warm, so I opened the windows for the cold air. I opened our windows in the room and went down to get our stuff. When we got down, my dad passed us our stuff, and my friend took it up the stairs. While I was sitting and waiting for my grandmother to make us some hot chocolate, I asked her if me and my friend could watch a movie before bed, and she said it was okay, but just to not put the TV on too loud. After we drank, ate, and showered, my grandparents were asleep. So me and my friend were searching for a horror movie to watch, and decided on Friday the 13th. We started watching, and it was nice after the movie, and went to bed. I closed the doors and we went to sleep. The next morning we woke up at 8, and I rushed down the stairs to eat breakfast and got ready so we could go out for a walk. It was a nice sunny day in the snow, but still a bit chilly. We asked my granddad and grandparents if we could go on the walking route, and they said yes, but that we should stay on the path. My grandmother packed us a bag with soda and snacks for when we got hungry. As soon as we were done eating, we started to walk. It was a nice long walk around the forest, and it was almost an hour. We walked slowly. I sat down on a rock to eat something, and my friend sat next to me, when all of a sudden, we heard a weird noise in front of us. We looked at each other and stood up and walked in the direction of the sound. That's when we noticed blood on the snow. At first I thought it was perhaps a fox who got a rabbit, so we walked on. But all of a sudden we heard talking. It was a girl who was crying out for help. We tried to listen to where the sound was coming from, and my friend stopped me and told me that it might be a bad idea. But I brushed it off and told her that the girl could be in trouble. We were in the middle of flipping nowhere, so we kept walking, and for a while longer it was quiet, and we started yelling out, "Hello? Anyone there?" like silly 13-year-olds. We heard the same thing again, and started running to the sound, but I tripped and fell over a rock in the snow, and my friend started laughing at me. When I stood up, my friend showed me that in front of us was a cabin. We thought it would be a good idea to go inside. We went in and saw a girl's shoes and shirts and panties lying around the place with old food that had already begun to rot and dishes with cobwebs on them, and we could see the place had been abandoned for a while. We looked around more and went into a room that was horrible looking. There were chains against the wall and a bed with straps on, and we saw knives. We looked around and saw blood against the wall and floors, and we screamed when we turned around and saw a girl standing by the door. My friend and I ran out the cabin as fast as we could. We came back to the route and didn't stop running, and decided not to tell my parents or grandparents what we saw in fear of getting into trouble. At home we went to our room and spoke about it and ignored it. We watched movies and let the time pass by. At night we went to bed because we were too tired from the walk and watching movies. When we went back to bed, I heard screaming and woke up seeing my friend standing outside the balcony. I asked her why she screamed and told her my parents would be mad. She told me that it wasn't her, it was the girl by the lake, and pointed. And that was the same girl, and some other girls standing there, yelling, saying, "Help us." I shut the door and went inside, spooked, and we turned around and my dad was inside our room with my mum, asking why we were crying and yelling. We told them about the girls, and saw my grandma come in, and said that there wasn't anyone out there, and that if there were, they would have heard them screaming because she was sitting outside. We looked at each other and my friend said we saw her on our walk, and my dad asked where. So we told them, and my grandmother sat down and told us that a few years ago, there were murders in that place. A guy would take girls and lock them up, do unspeakable things to them, and then dispose of them as if they were garbage. He did get caught and locked up, but the remains of the victims were never found. Till this day I keep thinking, what if they wanted our help finding their remains? Or are they just souls that haven't found peace yet? No one deserves to go like that. This story happened in the early 2000s to my mother, when she worked as a maid for a very wealthy family. This family owned a very large plot of land. My mother, who cleaned for them, lived with them as well at the time, and when they went camping, what they actually did was move their current domicile from a luxury mansion to a very large collection of cabins. Now, the family consisted of the husband, wife, and 3 kids. There were 3 cabins, one for the eldest daughter, one for the couple, and one for the 2 younger children. They all enjoyed staying in the cabins, but every time that they went, there was always an argument with who stayed in what they called the middle cabin. Now, the cabins were all generally the same. There was not much different in or out. They were all equipped with the most luxury, high-end stuff you could get in those days. The rooms were heated, there was a huge TV in every room, books, more than you could possibly read, and a whole list of luxury amenities for my mum to clean and for them to hardly ever use. Except the TV, of course. The middle cabin was always a point of contention because no one ever wanted to go in there. On the drive in, my mother was informed by the eldest daughter that they drew straws, and she, this year, was the one who was going to be relegated to the middle cabin. Now, what is wrong with the middle cabin, you may be wondering? Now, this is something my mum never figured out. Was it facing the wrong angle? Impossible, because they all faced the same tree line and were pretty much next to each other with a few meters in between for space and privacy. So what was it about this cabin that made it so different from the other 2? Was it that it was sandwiched in the middle? Maybe. But what my mother later learned while cleaning, as this was her first time actually attending these cabins with them, is there was something peculiar about the middle one. So allow me to enlighten you on what it was that made this cabin so undesirable. Well, on the 3rd day in the 2-week stay, my mother, who stayed in a much more smaller cabin a lot further down with the remainder of the staff, she came in to clean the cabin. Of course, there's always dust to clean up, do the laundry, etc., etc. And while she stepped out onto the balcony to have a smoke, she was just staring off into the trees. She recalls this moment particularly vividly, as she's looking out over the tree line, she felt a sense of malevolence coming from there, almost as if the land itself wanted them away. As she was puffing away, preparing to throw it to the ground and clean it up, did she feel 2 hands touch her shoulder, as if they were about to grab her. In an instant, she turned around. There was nothing there. She pretty much wet herself on the spot and had to run to the toilet to avoid an accident, but she was pretty shaken up for the rest of the day. That evening, she spoke with some of the other workers and asked them if they knew the reason why no one liked the middle cabin. Most of them didn't really have permission to go up to the cabins themselves and didn't really know the answer. None of them volunteered anything useful. So my mom didn't divulge any information she had as to what the reason could be just yet. A few days go by and obviously my mom tries to do the middle cabin when it comes to cleaning as quickly as possible to avoid any spooks which she desperately didn't want to encounter. On the 4th or 5th day, right as she's doing the laundry, she hears something in the bathroom. She knows that the eldest daughter is out, they'd gone on some expedition somewhere, and walks over to the bathroom with trepidation. Now here's the weird part, she'd just cleaned the bathroom and left the front and back door open to ventilate the cabin. She says there's no way anyone could have made their way into the cabin without her seeing, but nonetheless, she tries to be reasonable and assumes the daughter's just come back early. She calls out to her and there's no reply. That's when she starts walking towards the toilet very carefully, not wanting to be heard. She starts peering her eyes over towards the toilet door, which is open, and the more she sees, she realizes there's nothing there. She gets her head the whole way past the door, and there's nothing. She calms down, and is relieved that it must have just been her imagination. She finishes cleaning up, puts the clean clothes away in the drawers, and closes the balcony door. Then she goes over to the front door, and just as she's closing it again, does she hear someone say something inaudible for the toilet again. But this time my mum knew better, and decided to close the door and leave it at that. She knew for a fact no one had come in. That afternoon, as she was having her dinner, she sees the family return, and they're all there, so there's no way it was the daughter. This last thing happened on one of her last nights there and nearly made her quit on the spot. The daughter had had pizza, and several of the boxes were lying around on the floor. This girl, you could tell, had been raised a bit spoiled, as she left any pizza she didn't really want on the floor instead of in the box. This was something that particularly irked my mother, and as she was cleaning everything up, complaining about how a little spoilt brat the girl was and how easy it was to just put your waste back in the box, did she hear a shriek from behind her. She thought that the daughter had heard her, even though she was cursing in Spanish, and spun around quickly. Fear, not only for losing her job, but of the scream itself, roared inside her. Her fear increased 1,000-fold, and as she turned her head, she saw what she could only describe as a collection of black squiggles. She said it was like a child's drawing, where they try and make people but colour them in with only the pencil. These squiggles, she had no real way of describing it other than that. It was person-shaped, and she heard the sound come from its direction. She stared at it wide-eyed for about a second before it vanished into nothing. She fled from the cabin without shutting the door and stayed on her bunk in the workers' quarters for a few hours, before one of her friends came up and asked her what was wrong. She said that she'd seen something in the middle cabin and was too afraid to go back. The friend didn't really ask what it was, but said that they should probably finish up before the family returned home, and my mother begrudgingly returned, extremely cautiously. Between the two, they managed to clean everything up quickly and efficiently, and then went back to rest. That morning, as my mother started doing the cleanup for the room, it just so happened that the elder daughter, Marina, was there at the same time. She wasn't rude, just a bit slobbish, and asked my mother how she was. And she politely said, "Fine, Miss Marina, how are you?" in the standard robot run-through of acceptable replies when asked that question, "How are you?" As she was saying, "Yeah, fine," she remembered what had happened, and then, cautiously, asked her something. "Why does no one want to stay in the middle cabin, Marina?" That's when her eyes opened wide, and she looked at my mother straight in the eyes and said, "Because this is the only cabin that's haunted." My mother then gave her a look, and Marina could see from her expression that she must have seen something as well, and badgered my mum, asking why she'd asked and if she'd seen something. Well, she managed to get it out of my mother. My mother said what had happened to her the last few times she'd been in the cabin, and said that it was probably nothing. But then Marina insisted it certainly was, and then confessed that she had seen the exact same figure too, the squiggly one, and that it had scared her lifeless, which is why she was so afraid coming her first night here, because when she was a younger girl of around 7, was the first time she saw it. One of her other siblings at the time was with her too, but she was asleep when Marina saw it. They actually bonded over this experience and kept in touch long after my mum stopped working for them. My mother was both relieved and terrified that her suspicions and feelings were confirmed, that the middle cabin was haunted, and that what she had seen really did happen. I had just moved into my great-grandfather's cabin that he left me after finishing my job. My second night I had a very prolific dream where I didn't have any of my scars and was married to my high school sweetheart, which was my ideal life at the time. In the dream we had a pet cat, a bobcat to be specific. I woke up that morning and in the forest I saw a bobcat with a shadow that didn't belong to him. It was twice as tall as me, and had 2 hands and a triangular-shaped head. The next night I had a dream where my mum made her famous tofu and mushroom stuffed peppers, and I ate them while watching the Star Wars sequel with the bobcat sleeping in my lap. When I woke up that morning and saw the cat again, I yelled at it. All yesterday I thought about my mum, tofu, and the Star Wars sequels. I'll see you through. The only thing I didn't hate in that dream was my mum. I had tricked him, and it proved that he was trying to manipulate me. The next dream was a nightmare and far less vivid but lucid. I was attacked again and again by my friends and family. I never fought back and never let the bobcat help. The next dream, the forest came alive and crushed my home and my family. And then, in the dream, the bobcat spoke. "You will be my echo. It has been decided. I can be a boon to your life and family, or curse upon you and your children." He waited for an answer, and I let him wait. We sat across from each other for what felt like an eternity, and eventually woke up to my friend shaking me in a panic, saying I'd been asleep for nearly 3 days. I kept having dreams that ranged from the perfect life to hell on earth, as it thrashed about my head like a child upset that the bird in the cage isn't singing. One day I was hunting around for geese and came across a bobcat. It didn't run away and followed me all over the woods. Now I know these woods like the back of my hand, as I've hunted there for years before I moved. I kept getting lost the whole time the damn cat was following me. Respect be damned, I thought, and I shot it in the head. I never got any more dreams after that. If anyone knows what the hell that was, I'd love to know. I was with a couple of buddies hiking trails up Helen, Georgia, when we decided to follow some game trails off the main trail just to see what we could come across. Around an hour into the game trail, we realized we should just turn back, but we had made so many loops and turns we quickly ended up lost. We started just cutting back in the general direction of the main trail, then came across a clearing with a very run-down and decaying cabin. Naturally, being young and dumb males, we decided to explore it. The front door was just hanging off and fell off when we tried to open it. Parts of the floor would collapse as we walked through. There was an old, nasty-looking mattress that was covered in mold and almost decayed, a bunch of dishes lying in random places, and what appeared to be a very, very old ham radio. In one of those rooms, we found a completely decomposed skeleton of what we assumed to be a dog or coyote, and after exploring a bit, we decided to hit the main trail before darkness set in so that we could set up camp and not get lost. I've been back about 5 times since, and can never seem to find that cabin again. I wonder what happened there, why it was abandoned, and what the hell happened to the creature who met its final end inside it. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to give a huge thanks to everyone who supports me over on Patreon and who's a YouTube member. Your support goes a long way, and as a thank you, you can find extra content over on that platform, and if you'd like to join, feel free to check it out. If you want to see more stories, you can find the links on screen now, and hopefully see you in the next one.